we'll go ahead and start. Just give us 1 second to start it up.
All right. All right, and I want to say thank you to Don. He had a great presentation, and I want to add more to quality and accuracy, so you're going to be sick of that before the second presentation here. So I want to open up with good morning. I'm fortunate to be asked here to speak at the TUC conference for several years running now. It's one of my favorite conferences to be at. Although I don't get a chance to really play with the tools anymore in extraction, I still rely on Ted and his team for producing some of the quality control utilities that he has built into the software to help me kind of check and make sure that my data is accurate at the end of the day. So although graduated from actually extracting, now I'm checking through the data. It's amazing software. So today I'm going to actually be speaking about the data integrity workflows with a focus on the accuracy analysis. So I'm sure you guys have seen me around here before. I want to talk to you about myself a little bit. I've been working in the survey industry for about 19 years. Large majority of it now has been in the LiDAR realm. The first time I was introduced to TopoDOT was when I worked at a company, EarthEye, back in 2012. From the moment one, the software was going to be a game changer. I just knew it. In my opinion, Ted and his team had bridged the gap between your typical drape and your draw and drape technology to a dynamic extraction of the LiDAR point cloud itself. And from that point on, Ted and his team have been truly just kind of knocking down the market. So, a lot of you guys have seen me here with other companies. I recently, about a year and a half ago, came on board at McKim Creed. And I think it was the right time. Although McKim Creed is one of the first to perform mobile LiDAR in the state of Florida, they decided to ramp up the LiDAR program. So I'm just showing the map of where McKim Creed has their offices, but part of that being the right time to hop onto McKim Creed is they wanted to go national. They wanted to make LiDAR big. And that's what we're here to do. So we've broken down some barriers from the regional bounds, and we're expanding. So don't be fooled by the locations of where the offices are. If you're in California, give me a call. We'll see what we can do. So not only did McKim Creed expand and revamp terrestrial LiDAR services, but we decided to group together several of our specialty services that McKim Creed offers. This allows us to kind of tap into resources and also breaking down those boundaries. We can cross-train some technicians who do a lot of similar workflows, just in a different department, static, aerial, mobile. And by doing so, we can duplicate less staff, and we can fine-tune their skills, so that way we can create a cost-effective approach that can serve our clients and meet their needs, because we have the multiple platforms and we're the same group. It's not like I'm reaching out to my aerial group and say, I need an aerial project. I need a quote for aerial. And I'm reaching out to my static group. Hey, we've got a bridge underneath this bridge. They want to do more than just clearances. They want to know where all the bends are. And then I've got the mobile who are rolling through and collecting the whole roadway. So we have the combination of all those data sets like we were just talking about. So now it's under one group. So we brought those specialties together. One of the things that you might look at and kind of go, oh, are you sure, is hydrographic. In McKim Creed, we don't have an aerial bathy unit at this time for LiDAR, but we do have heavy sonar-based systems. At the end of the day, they're trajectory-based systems, just like a mobile or aerial system. They both use Aplonics. They both work in similar fashions, and actually they generate a point cloud as well. So yeah, we have played with TopoDOT in the hydrographic world and use that to map some sea floor and riverbeds. So more to talk to you about that, Ted, if we run into cool stuff. So I want to talk about the data integrity side. So data integrity is defined as a concept and process that ensures accuracy, completeness, consistency, and validity of an organization's data. By following this process, we not only ensure the integrity of the data, but we guarantee we have accurate and correct data. To ensure LiDAR and data integrity, you need to have a consistent, repeatable workflow with very little deviation and heavy emphasis on the accuracy analysis side and breakpoints along the way so that we're not going to deviate our path or back ourselves into a corner. Some key points of the workflow is the management of the data itself. We're dealing with large data sets on a sensor that's in a remote location. We've got to get it into our network and backed up and stored so we don't lose any of the raw data. We then have to move the data again to process it on a processing machine. And then we have to calibrate the data and then make sure it is accurate and complete and a quality data set. Then we have to validate the LiDAR against a third party, I prefer, or another tool that validates the accuracy overall. And then, of course, the final product, probably want to use some of those same accuracy tools to make sure that the final DTM, although looks complete and pretty, is it accurate? So the first step of data integrity is to map out the data lifespan throughout various stages of the project process. Normally, this is simply achieved by placing the data on a server, setting up some sort of Microsoft backup solution so you don't lose it. Then you would copy it to a random technician's machine, and they process the data, export the final LES, it goes back to the server, and now your extraction team starts working on it. That all works out great until you start working with terabytes of data. Those moves and the amount of data and the time and the accessibility of the data becomes an issue. It becomes a bottleneck. And I mentioned before, we moved to a cloud-based solution for all storage, for solution and storage. So to be honest, TopoShare was actually the inspiration of moving to a cloud-based system. I saw how well it worked with getting the data out to my extraction team who could be in many different parts of the country. And it inspired me to kind of take the traditional processing from the computer itself, from a standalone computer in an office with the technicians in behind it, and putting those computers in the cloud as well. So we do all of our processing on the cloud as well. Sorry, guys. Technical difficulties, sorry. All right, I want to walk you through that lifespan. So I kind of put up here a little diagram of the data storage, and this was actually key in building the workflow, and something that I was able to talk with IT. So it was very, very required step here, and just kind of teach IT how we go from step to step, where we're going to need their help and assistance. So it all kind of starts with the mission planning. We get a client who comes up to us and says, "Hey, we need a point cloud," and then it's up to us and our special service group to go through and kind of find the best tool for the project, or multiple sets of tools. So you kind of start with mission planning, and like I said, you capture all the aspects and put together this acquisition plan. Also, in that same mission planning, we'll generate project schedules, and from those project schedules, we'll generate kickoff meetings, expectations to the clients, and kind of carry the lifespan in a schedule. From there, once we get the data, once we get the project into a schedule, we can communicate the critical paths, such as primary control, target control, checkpoints, cross sections, and deliveries. What's cool about putting together the schedule up front is that it allows us to readjust timelines that make sense and communicate those ahead of time. So if I miss my primary control delivery by 3 weeks, either I got to find a way to catch up the project, or I can communicate that to the client maybe months in advance, or depending on the size of the project, could be a year in advance, just by seeing these little slips. So it's very important that the mission planning has not only just what tool we're going to use, how we're going to approach the project, but maybe take a little bit further and build your entire project lifespan in a schedule. From there, we take some of those steps that we've built in that mission planning, such as the drive plan, target plans, and we load that into our mobile system or into our give it to our static team or aerial team, and we actually perform the collection. Another part of the data integrity here is now we've got data on a remote system that's not behind our firewall. It's susceptible to damage, to failures, name it, especially in the mobile, we're driving down the road. You can get to an accident tomorrow and we lose the data. So as soon as we have the collection finalized, we'll actually take 2 hard drives and we'll create redundant copies on those hard drives. So that way one can be shipped, the other can be stored with a sensor, that we always have a backup. Once we get one of those copies to our Azure Cloud service, and that's the copy raw data to blob storage, that last little container there, that's where we kind of start the next process. So we still have those backups, but we also have it on the cloud. Now it's being backed up officially through Azure. So a little bit breathe safely there that we have the data properly stored. Now we're going to go into the next phase of the data integrity or data management, and we're going to go actually copy this data down and start processing. As I mentioned, we're using cloud machines. Data's already on Azure. I can copy 300 gigabytes in 15 minutes from my data storage to the local machine and start processing. So the first step once we start processing is to kind of do a coverage check, make sure everything's working properly. So we did all the steps before to make sure the data stays intact, but when we don't know if it's actually usable, because we have to do a coverage check. Did the crews actually drive as intended? Did we encounter any issues? Did we have any failed records? Things like that. So a lot of times the first thing we do is a coverage check, and I like to kind of couple that with the initial processing. So if you work with me, you're going to always hear, where's my primary control values? Because that's kind of that first step. I can do a coverage check without primary control, but I'm going to have to redo those steps. So I like to time it so that I get my primary control about the same time we do the collection. So we can kind of work forward motion instead of just doing a task, hitting a checkbox. So once we receive all the rest of the control elements, we can begin the actual calibration of the data. And that calibration includes the relative accuracy and the geospatial calibration. So we're talking about cloud to cloud as well as tying it to control. Control is very important. I want to shadow Don there. Your control is what everything's based off of. So if you're not confident in your control, or if you're trying to work ahead of your control, it's not the best idea. Wait till your control is nice and set and verify before you move to this step. After the calibration is completed, you go through your first accuracy analysis steps, and this is where you're checking your line-to-line, some of your deviations, your densities, how well you hit control. I'll get into some of those steps here in a few minutes. But basically, once the data is QC'd, now it's ready to be handed out to our extraction team for extraction and the downstream products. At the same time, we're actually copying that data right back up to the Azure where it's backed up a second time. So not only do I have my raw project preserved, I have a copy of my process project as well. And I have another redundant copy of my LAS that's being hourly broadcasted on the Topo share. So my extraction team, which is spread all over the eastern seaboard right now, can pull their data down locally and start the extraction process. At the end of the extraction, all of our final deliverables are generally small in comparison to those large raw and processed data sets. They're 500 to terabyte to multiple terabytes of data. So a lot of that data gets pushed right back to our typical servers. So we didn't circumvent our company didn't all completely convert over to cloud-based processing just the remote sensing side. So now we have our finalized completed project with the survey's report we put back on the project folders, and it gets stored and backed up. So in the future, if anybody needs to recall what was delivered, or make modifications to it, we have that data relatively accessible and we don't have to go through our cloud process. So that's kind of our data management from beginning to end of the procedure there. So cloud computing. Does anybody here actually use cloud computing? Just throw his hands up, anybody? Got 1, 2, 3. So see, it's starting to actually become something real. It's not mainstream yet because it takes some infrastructure to do it, but for the most part, it will reduce a lot of the bottlenecks. So cloud computing has been around for some time now, but the price is starting to drop, so we're starting to get a few people to use it. Even though it's pricey, there's other areas you save money, and that is through we don't have to create redundant servers. We don't have to create backup systems, so we have less server maintenance. We have less hardware maintenance. Have we all sat in the office and we're copying down, I don't know, 50 gigs of LiDAR data to my local machine, and the rest of the office is screaming at you, hey, what's going on? Server's tanking. It's my fault. So it kind of reduces the slowdowns in your office by staying on the cloud. So all those kind of add up and kind of offset that cost a little bit. Another incentive to cloud computing is the accessibility to the data. So I can be anywhere and hop into one of my processing machines. I can calibrate data. If one of my technicians say, hey, I need your opinion on something, I just log right into that machine. It doesn't matter if I'm here. Actually, I was sitting over there before and I had to do that right here in the auditorium. Hop into the machine, take a look at something, and make a decision and move on. So the accessibility is a big factor. The other thing is it reduces bottlenecks. If you build 1 or 2 machines, you can scale up and add multiple machines to handle bigger data sets. I can, instead of going down and calling IT and saying, hey, I need another 2 terabytes of data, I got a large project, I can scale up that data to 2 terabytes and pay for it, but once the project's over, I can drop it back down to the original amount of memory I had. So it's nice to be able to scale it up, and it's instantaneous. As soon as I put the request in, it's there. So now we're going to kind of dive into a little more of the LiDAR qualities and some of the things that really TopoDOT is the champion here for. So LiDAR quality consists mostly of your coverage check, relative cloud-to-cloud accuracies, and the geospatial accuracy. Where is it in the right place in the world? And that comes into play, as Don said, when you're merging together multiple data sets. It's very important that your geospatial accuracy is correct and your control is tight across all portions of your project. Coverage, mostly with coverage checks, we're looking to see if the data covers the intended area of interest with the expected densities. And beyond the coverage check, I highly recommend you start identifying obscure to low confidence areas. This way you can communicate those early on, going back to the whole schedule and keeping your clients and stakeholders comprised of the situation. If we all know that with a lot of our LiDAR sensors, there's going to be some supplemental from a surveyor. We call it obscured areas. We submit that. They'll go and fill in those areas. We incorporate it into the design. But sooner we can get that information, sooner we can communicate that, we can really kind of hone in that schedule downstream. If we get through all of our extraction and then say, oh yeah, by the way, we got these big obscured areas, no one's going to be happy at the end of the day. Relative accuracy. So how well does data match itself or is calibrated? You should never be able to cut a cross-section through a data point cloud and see individual floating lines. It should be kind of like all your lines should be sandwiched together, and I recommend that you should never do a single pass without any overlap, because there's no validation line to line. You could have a hiccup in your GNSS and have a bubble in the data, and there's no way for you to validate it. It's going to be found by the surveyor who's in the field, someone else is doing independent checks, or the contractor. So that's why I say you should never see an individual scan. You should have multiple scans, and they should be calibrated together so that it's one point cloud. And the thickness of that point cloud in the mobile world should be under 2 centimeters, or 0.06 feet. Areas of bisecting lines like intersections, it might drift a little bit more. As you go away from the scanner, the data gets a little bit more noisy and it can kind of, the laser itself is not a circle, it's more of an ellipse, so you could get a little bit of edge curling, I've noticed, as you combine those bisecting scans. So you might get up to 2.5 centimeters or 0.08 feet. Static LiDAR should be closer to 1 centimeter of total noise. It's a much simpler system to put together. As long as your control's good and you leapfrog your targets properly, or your MSA is good, your data is going to come together a lot tighter, a lot nicer. So it should be a little bit more precise than your mobile data. But then you have the aerial, which a lot of times it might be upwards to 5 centimeters of error, of total noise, not error, but total noise, because now your perspective has changed and you're shooting your distances much further. So at the end of the day, when you call someone up and ask for LiDAR services, make sure that they're picking the right tool for the job and you communicate those accuracies. So geospatial accuracy is the true location on the Earth's surface. This is important for the repeatability and reliability of the data. Geospatial accuracy is measured by how well it matched project control through panels and target points. And this is the part where we start rolling TopoDOT. TopoDOT makes all these little checks nice and quick and easy. And for me as a manager now, I won't move past one phase till we check and verify each one of these tools. So in your assessment tab, the ones we're going to highlight today is control point to data, deviation overview, or heat map as a lot of people call it. I myself call it that too, and your density overview. We're going to touch a little bit about the 3D mesh assessments, but that's later when you're checking that final product. So in the so let's talk about the control point analysis first. Control point analysis, you simply load your control into the software. You pick whether you want a 2D or 3D report. The 2D is a vertical report, kind of compares just the single point loaded in from your control and samples the data. You set the sample size, and it's going to give you how well it meets that total noise level. Where does it really sit in that data? The 3D uses a little bit more of the flat asset identification technology that TopoDOT has built in, and you can actually identify the size and shape of the target. And it's going to give you the X, Y, and Z deviation for each point. Both reports will provide you with an RMS for all input control points. In addition to the report, TopoDOT makes it easy for you to review each point and fix any misinterpreted points simply by toggling through each point in the QC tab, QA/QC tab, which as you start putting together and doing more of the check cross sections, it's very important you do toggle through them because you could have a false errors. The density map, pretty self-explanatory. You're defining a sample size, whether it's points per square meter, points per square foot, and the software will go through and either use the loaded data or the data in the project, and it'll go through and create a heat map of the density that meets or exceeds that. In this case, the top image there, the density mapping, the required density was, I think, 150 points per square meter. I think when I open this tool up, I think I'm getting closer to 15,000 points per square meter in the road, and then it tapers off as you go away. We do drive every lane, and we push all of our lanes together, so we put down some density. The deviation map is the next tool, and what we're looking there is how well do each line match. Do you have a hot spot in one line? Did it not? Then that's where it goes back to me explaining that you should never go with a single pass, because there's no way to validate those hot spots. Very often you can be rolling through the project and drive the same lane twice or drive the adjacent lane, and for some reason one of the lanes go wonky for a second. Could be environmental reasons, could be a truck driving by and dropping off all your satellites on half your sky on that pass. Many things could be the factor that couldn't be resolved through the POSPAC process or the initial SBET process. So those areas we would go back through and use in this case, our Regal software, and make those adjustments to smooth out those areas of GPS inconsistency. So LiDAR validation. So this is that next step where I like to use at least a different tool or even a third party to go and check the data. Not that I feel like I need someone to govern me, but it helps me make sure that my data is accurate and good. And a lot of DOTs will require check cross-sections or check scans. So the checkpoints, and ASPRS also for aerial, it requires you to do a certain amount of checkpoints per every project as well. So rolling through the same tools, so we're going to use pretty much the same tools to generate these next sets of checks, so to validate your whole point cloud. So checkpoints are going to be, you're going to use the same drawing a blank on the tool. Control point to data tool where you're going to load in your checkpoints. It's going to analyze through the LiDAR at a certain sample size, and it's going to give you an RMS. This is typically vertically. You could set it with the same manner and put panels and have an independent check. But the difference between the checkpoints and your target points, your panel points, are these are not used in translation. These are independent checks to validate the entire data set. Check cross-sections are generally used on road corridors, or roads or other corridor projects, and simply it's just a cross-section that bisects the corridor. You want to do it on a decent interval. Some places do it 1,000 foot, some do 2,500 feet on the intervals. And it's just a series of single shots taken that bisects through that corridor. Those shots are usually taken at natural or man-made grade breaks. This is usually done with a total station and levels to make sure you have some tight accuracy, especially if we're going on the road. We have a much tighter tolerance. So two ways you can, the way you can test this is, the way you can test this through TopoDOT is you can run the control point to data analysis tool again, and it'll give you those errors. Now, I have noticed that when you're using this to check cross-sections, the slight horizontal mismeasurements on the back of curbs, walls, and things like that, you might get some false information. This is where that QA, QC tool comes in handy, where you can toggle through and make those adjustments. So it makes it nice and easy to work through. So actually, my favorite method is using the check scan. So we're going to take out a static scanner. We're going to set it up, and we're going to set up on the control that's already established on the corridor, and we're going to scan every 1,000 feet. And that's actually what I have in the image up here, is a mobile data set that's clipped out, and then the static scan of that area. And using your deviation tools, you can clearly see that, hey, in general, the check cross-section checks most of it. We had a few little hot spots, but the majority of it, that 95% compliancy, that's a pretty good check. And this is probably one of the worst ones I've had. I've had some better, but it's just kind of all around. But I've also had some that were completely red, and that's like, we got a problem. So it gives us the opportunity to go back and check and see where that problem is. It could be in our control. And now that we've processed the whole point cloud, it's not necessarily in our scans, it's in our control. So it's just a good way of validating and kind of bringing back the whole survey process together. And some people might say, well, what about horizontal misalignments? If I had a back a curve there, you can kind of see where the grass is between the sidewalk. You'll see like color striping. So if you truly did miss the top of a curve, you'd see a nice little stripe right down your data. So you can still check to some degree if you could zoom in a little bit more and see how it matches in the horizontal realm as well. Now the final product. So we've already done the first two steps of that data analysis and quality control checks. So you have all the things you need to check the DTM. So why not? So once again, in surveying, we have to be repeatable, and we have to rule out the systematic errors, and we've got to look for this stuff. So if we're not doing that step, we're not doing our jobs. So to do this next step, you'll need the control points, checkpoints, check cross-sections, check scans, and you can use a handful of different various tools. If I'm running a MicroStation or AutoCAD, if I'm working in certain DOTs and they have the tools built in, I'm going to use their tools. If not, always easily default to the TopoDOT tools so it can handle the same thing and do my control point to LiDAR checks. But in AutoCAD and MicroStation, we can actually take those points and run the analysis off the tin, or in AutoCAD, I like extracting the elevations from tin and just building a little Excel spreadsheet showing, hey, these were the input values. After I extracted my 10 values, these are my 10 values, and do a quick delta Z and make sure we match. So it's just another little check to make sure that the data was extracted properly. It looks good, right? It looks like a complete product, but does it actually meet the control and tie into the control? I don't know. That's why we do these extra checks. And in the check scans, once again, a little bit more data on the check scans was what I like about it. It's not just one answer, one solution. You can use the mesh assessment overview and see how well that matches to your mesh. And with that being said, that kind of takes me to the end of my whole data workflow and the whole quality process, the things I do to check to make sure my LiDAR is good for my clients. So I want to kind of close with a statement, and it is, we are all here because we know that LiDAR is the future. And we are fortunate to be part of this community. Please do your best to implement workflows, showcase positive use cases of LiDAR by proper handling of the products and software to generate confidence in our craft. The last thing we want to do in this community is for someone to cut all the corners, and then we go back into where people start questioning, why would you use LiDAR? And some of the, recently that's actually happened with a client that I've worked with is, well, LiDAR, it doesn't work. Diving in, we found out why it didn't work, but you know, it's just, let's try to curb some of those mentalities and some of those thoughts by just doing our jobs right and focusing on the quality. And I'm going to open up for any questions. I was going to say straight to Ted. I knew it. He was going straight there. Right. I know. I would encourage it. It's like a hot potato, man. It's just keep going. I know, right? Yeah.
Thanks for the presentation. Just out of curiosity, do you guys typically do your extraction in, I'll say generic levels, where you know might just have like back a curb and flow line and edge of pavement, or do you guys typically draft in like DOT standard, where you're placing line work in DOT standard levels and cells and that sort of stuff and delivering it as is, or is it more of like the generic and then exporting out like a CSV and then importing it into whatever program?
So it's a mixed bag, but I'm going to say mostly we follow with whatever the local standard is. Sometimes if we're sharing across regions, not everybody's familiar with everybody's standards, so we kind of pick the most granular template, if you will. And I want to give kudos to FDOT because they break everything out to very granular levels. Sidewalk has 2 levels, face and front and back. So curbs have back, face, flow, edge of pavement. So my suggestion is either way you go, make sure you are extracting off the most granular data set unless you're working in those state kits. Like I said, the idea is you always want to extract in the state kits, or if you're doing FDOT, or if we're not doing the project for FDOT, we are going to use the FDOT state kit to do our extraction because then we can translate it into other proprietary or standards much easier.
Thank you.
What are your limitations of cloud computing at this point?
I haven't really found one yet. Mostly just, we got a couple of projects recently that the raw data is almost a terabyte. So we had to add more RAM to those machines, but other than that, processing-wise, we're using the Regal suite. We're not having too many issues. Going back to that mission planning, if it's a project too large, we're actually going to break it into multiple missions to kind of eliminate some of that and kind of foresee some of that. But you know, as long as that's done according to plan, we haven't really found a limitation just yet. I'm not saying there isn't one out there, I just haven't found it yet. So next year, ask me the question again.
I was going to say I really liked what you said about the when you were talking about your different QAQC and doing the check sections. We do that all the time. We have the field crews go out and take hard shots on the surface, on the roads and the sidewalks to check that, and then we'll go out into the grassy areas. If it's in a rural area, there could be grass that's 2-3 feet tall. The LiDAR is not going to penetrate typically, you know, all the way to the ground. So you have to have. It's essential to have those check shots out there so that you know how much to drop your ground shots that you extract in TopoDOT. There's that box that you can check where it's the drop vertical by so much of a distance. Could be a tenth or half a foot or whatever it is, but those check shots really help you to determine how much you need to drop those by.
Yeah.
So we use that all the time.
The other part of that is some people don't like that idea of dropping it, and they're like, well, if it's too big, too much of an error, delta error, let's just have boots on the ground and go and clear that.
Sure,
So that's the other thing, is communicating that up front. So
Yeah.
that's where those checkpoints come in handy when you're just doing that first analysis on the LiDAR. Kind of helps you see how well the data penetrates. So.
Yeah, actually, I want to address that. Always had a question. So, what's your feeling for the quality? So, quality off the road where it's in grass. Is anybody? I mean, how do you guys approach that? And I know we have that tool where it just kind of drops it down. You can put a fixed offset, but what kind of verification are you guys really up against? I mean, you know, because I imagine you go off the road, you can just, by how hard you put your pole in the ground, it could be a half
We'll
inch
see.
or an
Do I
inch.
have my surveyors in here today?
So I mean,
if we do, then I want to pick on them a little bit.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I started doing is I require them to actually use a topo foot, because they say all the time, well, I can hold that rod all day long and take those shots. I'm going to put it right on the surface. I'm not going to let it sink in. If you've ever taken even a prism on top of a prism rod and just sat it there, and especially in Florida, you're in sugar sand. So as soon as you put it there, it sinks down 6, 7, hundreds, at least 500s to the bare minimum, right?
Yeah.
So it's already sinking. So really drove that hard with my survey crews, that if you're doing check cross sections, I don't care how you do the rest of your survey, but if you're doing check cross sections, you must have the topo foot on there, because that'll kind of limit some of the erroneous errors that we can't prove or disprove.
okay.
So, but to add to that, that's why companies prior, we had different vehicles. We actually have changed our platform so we can start driving on the backside of corridors, down some of the medians to kind of fill in and try to get some nadir view from a mobile aspect. If not, then we could always plan to do aerial on off-pavement situations and then do the mobile, and then we kind of merge that at about the 10, 15-foot mark off, depending on what type of corridor it is. So that goes back to that planning, how we're going to do it. What's the scope of the project? Is it just a road resurfacing? Then it's not as important. But if it's a widening, yeah, it's important. If they're doing ditch and drainage surveys, well, if the ditches have water in them, obviously all bets are off, no matter if I do aerial or mobile, because it's probably too wet to go choose from. So that's a traditional survey standpoint. So it's just all about the mission planning. You got to look at the corridor holistically, look at the time of the year, look at the recent weather events. It's mission planning isn't just throwing numbers at it and throwing targets on the road. There's a little bit more involved. Is it high traffic areas? If it's high traffic areas, do we collect at night or during the day? Well, we still want the imagery, so we do a kind of a hybrid collection, or we do 2 separate collections. So it's all about the planning on that. Hope that answers your question.
Oh, yeah. No, that's interesting. And that last point is very interesting, too. So,
Also, you're going to run your ground and hard check cross-sections with different tolerances when you run your control point analysis.
I run them all at the 0. In Florida, it's 0.06. In most cases, 0.05 is what I run them all against. And then I go and review each one that are off pavement. Because it's very possible to miss a grade break. I wouldn't say it's easier out in the field to find that grade break, but it might be more obvious to the person walking down the corridor than it is in the LiDAR. A lot of times in LiDAR, we got those tools that'll rip right through the data. We can miss a change in the corridor. So that's why we leave the tolerance the same. So that way we can identify those areas potentially. And I've got to wrap it up. So we'll make those decisions, make notes in our report. So I'd rather show it at a tighter tolerance and just make a note and pass that on. And if there's any additional needs, we can go back and do it later or change the method. So that being said, I think my time is cut off. So appreciate everybody. Thank you very much.